Welcome to AI-103, Full Practice Exam 1, Core Foundations and Azure AI Services. This set contains 50 original questions across the 5 exam domains. Use each question to practice the mechanism and service boundaries you will need on exam day. Here is how this practice exam works. First, read the complete scenario and every response. Next, lock in your answer. You will have 3 silent seconds to commit, and you can pause the video whenever you need more thinking time. Then, I will reveal the correct response. Finally, I will explain why it works and reinforce the exam pattern. If this practice helps, like the video and subscribe to WebLizard's Cert Lab for the next AI-103 set. Question 1. A team has connected application insights to a Foundry-hosted agent. Auditors must correlate a reported conversation with execution details, while the security team limits sensitive telemetry. Which 2 actions meet the requirements? Select 2 answers. A. Remove application insights and telemetry read roles because Foundry traces remain queryable without them. B. Retain trace telemetry without redaction because it contains execution timing but no prompts, outputs, or tool data. C. Redact or minimize sensitive inputs and outputs, and keep secrets out of span attributes. D. Use Azure Machine Learning Asset Metadata as the automatic provenance record for every agent inference and tool call. E. Use the trace ID to locate the conversation and review the conversation ID, trace timeline, and run step details. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Redact or minimize sensitive inputs and outputs, and keep secrets out of span attributes. E. Use the trace ID to locate the conversation and review the conversation ID, trace timeline, and run step details. Why this works. Foundry can map a trace ID to a conversation and expose the conversation ID with timeline and run step details. Trace telemetry can contain prompts, outputs, tool arguments, and results, so sensitive content must be redacted or minimized and secrets excluded from span attributes. Querying traces still depends on application insights access and the documented telemetry roles. Exam pattern. Choose trace correlation and telemetry minimization controls for an agent audit request. Question 2. An application drafts regulated customer notices. The team wants a self-critique loop that can revise weak drafts, but must not run indefinitely. Which design should the team implement? A. Have a maker create the draft and a checker evaluate defined criteria, return specific feedback, and resubmit revisions until approval or an iteration cap. Then use a fallback such as human escalation. B. Expose the model's hidden reasoning tokens, treat that raw chain of thought as verification, and approve the draft when it appears confident. C. Let one generator rewrite its output until the wording feels adequate, without explicit acceptance criteria or a maximum iteration count. D. Run a fluency score once and treat a readable result as proof of correctness, safety, and successful task completion. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Have a maker create the draft and a checker evaluate defined criteria, return specific feedback, and resubmit revisions until approval or an iteration cap. Then use a fallback such as human escalation. Why this works. A maker, checker, evaluator optimizer, critic, or reflection loop separates creation from evaluation, uses defined criteria and actionable feedback, and repeats only until approval or a maximum iteration limit. The design also needs fallback behavior when the cap is reached. Hidden reasoning tokens are not returned as message content, and raw chain-of-thought extraction is unsupported. Exam pattern. Select a bounded self-critique orchestration design for regulated output. Question 3. A claims processing agent is in production. Operations needs a live view of latency and failures, quality and safety scoring on a percentage of real conversations, a nightly fixed corpus check for quality drift, a weekly adversarial probe for safety and security weaknesses, and an on-call notification when quality gates fail or harmful output is detected. Which monitoring design assigns each requirement to the appropriate Microsoft Foundry mechanism? A. Use operational metrics for the live service view, continuous evaluation for sampled production conversations, scheduled evaluation for the fixed test corpus, scheduled red teaming for adversarial probes, and Azure Monitor alerts for on-call notification. B. Use Azure Monitor alerts for the live service view, operational metrics for sampled quality scoring, scheduled red teaming for the fixed corpus, continuous evaluation for on-call notification, and scheduled evaluation for adversarial probes. C. Use continuous evaluation for the live latency view, scheduled evaluation for sampled production conversations, operational metrics for adversarial probes, Azure Monitor alerts for the fixed corpus, and scheduled red teaming for gate notifications. D. Use operational metrics for the fixed corpus drift check, continuous evaluation for weekly adversarial probes, scheduled evaluation for all live service telemetry, scheduled red teaming for notifications, and Azure Monitor alerts for sampled scoring. Lock in your answer. Correct response, A. Use operational metrics for the live service view, continuous evaluation for sampled production conversations, scheduled evaluation for the fixed test corpus, scheduled red teaming for adversarial probes, and Azure Monitor alerts for on-call notification. Why this works. Operational metrics supply regular runtime measurements. Continuous evaluation scores production traffic at a sampled rate, while scheduled evaluation uses test datasets to detect drift. Scheduled red teaming performs adversarial safety and security testing, and Azure Monitor alerts notify operators when quality thresholds fail or harmful content appears. The other plans cross several of these monitoring boundaries. Exam pattern. Select a complete post-production monitoring portfolio by distinguishing runtime measurement, sampled live evaluation, fixed dataset drift evaluation, adversarial testing, and notification. Question 4. A developer is implementing application RAG. Search returns relevant passages, but the model answers as if it never saw them. Which correction restores the documented RAG flow? Visible artifact. The function named answer accepts a user query. It retrieves passages from an index using that query, builds the prompt from the user query alone, and sends that prompt to the model for generation. A. Keep the prompt unchanged and require the index to use vector retrieval because vector search alone injects grounding. B. Remove retrieval and send the private source documents directly to the model as an unrelated request. C. Build the model input from the user query plus the retrieved passages, then send that augmented prompt to the model. D. Generate the answer from the user query first, then retrieve passages only for storage after generation. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Build the model input from the user query plus the retrieved passages, then send that augmented prompt to the model. Why this works. Application RAG retrieves relevant content, augments the user's input with that grounding data, and sends the augmented prompt to the model. The code performs retrieval but discards the passages. Keyword, semantic, vector, and hybrid retrieval can all support a RAG index. The retrieval mode does not replace prompt augmentation. Exam pattern. Correct. A RAG implementation that retrieves content but fails to supply it to generation. Case study. Fabricam is preparing a Microsoft Foundry customer support agent. The agent uses Azure AI search retrieval for policy documents and a custom order status API. For a pilot document ingestion path, the team is evaluating the preview Logic Apps indexing integration. The team must configure each tool explicitly and establish post-production practices for quality, safety, drift detection, red teaming, and alerting. Keep this shared context in mind for the next question. Question 5. Using the case scenario, the pilot team records the following configuration summary. Which 3 statements accurately describe the resulting integration and its documented boundaries? Visible artifact. The indexing workflow has a preview lifecycle, consumption hosting, the Azure Artificial Intelligence search connector, and text as its source content. The agent search tool uses the project connection identifier policy search connection and the index name policy index. Select 3 answers. A. One Foundry Azure AI search tool instance can target several search indexes because the project connection is shared. B. The consumption workflow uses the managed Azure-hosted Azure AI search connector. C. The preview indexing workflow can replace the text setting with image or multimodal extraction without changing the documented feature boundary. D. The preview indexing path should account for source deletions not being propagated to the search index. E. Consumption hosting selects the built-in service provider connector used by Logic App Standard. F. The agent tool summary includes both required identifiers, project connection ID, and index name. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. The consumption workflow uses the managed Azure-hosted Azure AI search connector. D. The preview indexing path should account for source deletions not being propagated to the search index. F. The agent tool summary includes both required identifiers, project connection ID, and index name. Why this works. Logic App's consumption uses the managed Azure-hosted Azure AI search connector, whereas Logic App Standard uses the built-in service provider connector. The Foundry Azure AI Search Agent tool requires both project connection ID and index name, and one tool instance targets one index. The preview Logic App's indexing workflow is text-oriented and does not propagate source deletions to the index. Exam pattern. Interpret a workflow to search to agent configuration while preserving connector, lifecycle, and one index boundaries. Question 6. ARAG application passes document entitlement tests and cites every answer. In failed evaluations, the cited passages are on topic, but the paragraph containing the decisive policy exception is not retrieved. What is the most important defect to correct? Visible artifact. The function named answer accepts a question. It searches the index with that question and limits the result to the top 3 hits. It then sends the question, those hits as context, and source citation enabled to the model for generation. A. Remove document security filters because filtering is the likely cause whenever a relevant passage is missing. B. Make no retrieval change because citations prove that a grounded answer is complete and accurate. C. Measure passage relevance, then revise chunking, indexing, and the keyword/semantic/hybrid retrieval configuration so the missing policy text is retrieved. D. Increase model temperature so the model can reconstruct policy details absent from the retrieved passages. Lock in your answer. Correct response. C. Measure passage relevance, then revise chunking, indexing, and the keyword/semantic/hybrid retrieval configuration so the missing policy text is retrieved. Why this works. Grounding can still yield incomplete or inaccurate answers when retrieval is incomplete. Correct content preparation and retrieval configuration before expecting generation to recover evidence it never received. Exam pattern. Diagnose missing evidence despite citations and working authorization. Question 7. A team uses the Azure Content Understanding 2025-11-01 GA API. Search ingestion needs a clean representation for RAG, while an agent workflow needs schema-aligned fields with confidence and grounding. Which analyzer output design meets both needs? A. Produce Markdown only because content understanding clean representations support RAG but cannot provide structured inputs to agentic applications. B. Use one undifferentiated output because Markdown content and structured field JSON are interchangeable contracts with grounding always returned. C. Use Markdown for search and retrieval, define schema-aligned JSON fields for the agent, and enable estimate field source and confidence for optional confidence and grounding. D. Define schema fields but omit the GA opt-in because confidence and grounding are mandatory properties on every extracted field. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Use Markdown for search and retrieval, define schema-aligned JSON fields for the agent, and enable estimate field source and confidence for optional confidence and grounding. Why this works. Content understanding can provide Markdown for search and retrieval and schema matching JSON for automation or agent inputs. In the 2025 1101 GAPI, confidence and grounding are optional field properties enabled with estimate field source and confidence equals true. They are not returned for every field by default. Exam pattern. Select complementary content understanding outputs for RAG and an agent while preserving the GA grounding opt-in. Question 8. During a Canary rollout, telemetry captures request contracts from translator clients. Some clients remain on version 3.0, while others have moved to API version 2026-06-06. You must allow only requests whose destination schema matches the API version they declare. Which two request contracts should you allow? Select two answers. A. The client declares API version equals 2026-06-06 and supplies the destination as targets, language, FR. B. The client declares API version equals 3.0 and supplies the destination, language through, to equals FR. C. The client declares API version equals 3.0 and supplies the destination as targets, language, FR. D. The client declares API version equals 2026-06-06 and supplies the destination language through to equals FR. Lock in your answer. Correct response, A. The client declares API version equals 2026-06-06 and supplies the destination as targets language FR. B. The client declares API version equals 3.0 and supplies the destination language through to equals FR. Why this works. Allow option B and option A. Translator version 3.0 uses API version 3.0 and the to parameter for the target language. Translator text 2026-06-06 requires API version 2026-06-06 and replaces to with a targets array whose entries specify language. Therefore, option C applies the new destination schema to version 3.0, and option D applies the legacy destination parameter to the 2026-06-06 API. Exam pattern. Classify observed translator request contracts by whether the destination schema is compatible with the declared API version. Question 9. Two teams need separate access controls but can share model deployments, connections, and network security settings. All agent files, conversations, and vector stores must reside in customer-provided Azure resources and be isolated by project. Connected storage, Key Vault, and Azure AI search resources retain their own governance boundaries. Which architecture meets all requirements? A. Use one top-level Foundry resource with a project per team. Choose standard agent setup, share allowed parent settings, and manage each connected Azure resource, networking, and access policies separately. B. Use a separate top-level Foundry resource for every team. Choose basic agent setup and inherit governance for connected Azure resources from each project. C. Use one Foundry resource with separate projects. Choose basic agent setup and bring all connected Azure resources inside the Foundry governance boundary. D. Use one project with folders for team isolation. Choose standard agent setup and treat connected storage, Key Vault, and Azure AI Search as project-scoped assets. Lock in your answer. Correct response, A. Use one top-level Foundry resource with a project per team. Choose standard agent setup, share allowed parent settings, and manage each connected Azure resource networking and access policies separately. Why this works. Multiple projects on one Foundry resource can have separate access controls while sharing parent resource settings. Standard agent setup places files, conversations, and vector stores in customer-provided Azure resources with project isolation. Connected storage, Key Vault, and Azure AI Search remain independent Azure resources whose networking and access policies are managed separately. Exam pattern. Choose a Foundry hierarchy and agent state setup that satisfies team isolation, shared controls, customer-owned state, and separate connected resource governance. Question 10. A Microsoft Foundry RAG application searches an authorized policy index. A supplier inserts an instruction into an otherwise valid document, telling the model to ignore the system message and reveal unrelated context. The application uses the following prompt construction. Which change best addresses this defect while preserving retrieval grounding? Visible artifact. The function named answer searches the policy index with the question. It builds a 3-message prompt in order. First is a system message containing the system message constant. Second is a user message containing the question. Third is an assistant message containing the retrieved passages joined with line breaks. The model generates from that prompt, A. Move the retrieved passages into the system message so their instructions have higher priority than the user's question. B. Delete passages only when they contain the exact phrase ignore previous instructions, and leave all other retrieved text unchanged. C. Treat retrieved passages as untrusted data and use the system message and application logic to reduce document-based prompt injection. D. Treat every passage returned by the approved index as trusted instructions because the index is private. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Treat retrieved passages as untrusted data and use the system message and application logic to reduce document-based prompt injection. Why this works. Authorization of a document does not make its text a trusted instruction. Retrieved content should be treated as untrusted input, and system message and application controls should reduce document-based prompt injection. Promoting passages to system authority or filtering one literal phrase does not address varied attacks. Exam pattern. Separate source authorization from instruction trust. Question 11. A team is configuring one Azure Content Understanding document analyzer for scanned invoices. The analyzer must combine OCR, layout analysis, and structured field extraction. Review the configuration and identify what each labeled fragment contributes. Visible artifact. The base analyzer identifier is pre-built document. Fragment F1 enables optical character recognition. Fragment F2 enables layout analysis. Fragment F3 is the field schema named invoice fields. It contains one field named invoice total with number as its data type, total amount due as its description, and extract as its method. Requirements: 1. F1, 2. F2, 3. F3. Available targets. A. Extract text from images and scanned document content. B. Extract document structure, such as paragraphs, reading order, and other layout elements. C. Apply the same OCR and layout settings to audio and video analyzers. D. Define the structured fields, their data types, and how values are extracted. Lock in your answer. Correct response 1, F1, matches extract text from images and scanned document content. 2, F2, matches extract document structure such as paragraphs, reading order, and other layout elements. 3, F3, matches define the structured fields, their data types, and how values are extracted. Why this works? For a document analyzer, enable OCR controls text extraction, enable layout controls layout analysis, and field schema defines structured fields and extraction behavior. The archived custom invoice example places all three in one analyzer definition. Document local OCR and layout settings must not be transferred to audio or video analyzers. Exam pattern. Interpret a single content understanding document analyzer configuration that conjunctively implements OCR, layout analysis, and field extraction. Question 12. A team is building a Foundry agent. They have already verified that preview memory is supported for their chat and embedding deployments, API version, region, quota, and network design. In testing, the model emits an order status function call, but no order data is returned. Which change fixes the immediate defect without confusing retrieval, short-term context, and long-term memory? Visible artifact. The agent maps policy documents to file search. It maps the current session to durable conversation, and learned user preferences to memory preview. For order status, the mechanism is function calling, and the model selection behavior assumes the model executes the function. A. Store the function call arguments in the policy index and wait for retrieval to execute the external API. B. Copy the policy documents into preview memory and remove file search so every source uses one state mechanism. C. Replace the durable conversation with preview memory so the selected function runs outside the model context window. D. Have the application execute the selected order status function and return its result to the conversation. Lock in your answer. Correct response. D. Have the application execute the selected order status function and return its result to the conversation. Why this works? The model selects a function from the instructions and tool definitions. The application or service executes that function and returns the result into the conversation. File search remains appropriate for interaction documents. A durable conversation provides short-term continuity. And preview memory remains a distinct, managed, long-term mechanism for learned context. Exam pattern. Diagnose an agent configuration that assumes model tool selection also performs external function execution while preserving three distinct state and knowledge mechanisms. Question 13. An app analyzes one public image URL by using Azure Vision Image Analysis 4.0. The Azure Vision in Foundry Tools resource is in a supported caption region, and English output is acceptable. The app needs descriptions for multiple regions with bounding boxes, but its response parser finds no requested output. Which change should you make? Visible artifact. The request contains one public image address supplied as a uniform resource locator. It asks for the dense captions visual feature, and the response reader is caption result. A. Keep dense captions and read dense captions result, including each returned region's bounding box. B. Keep dense captions and translate caption result before trying to read regional bounding boxes. C. Change the request to caption and keep reading caption result so the app receives one whole image sentence. D. Pass a wildcard of image URLs because dense captions returns one caption for each input image. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Keep dense captions and read dense captions. Result, including each returned region's bounding box. Why this works? Dense captions is the Image Analysis 4.0 feature for detailed one-sentence descriptions of the whole image and up to 10 regions, including bounding boxes. A request for dense captions must be paired with dense captions result. The documented call accepts one image input, and captioning remains English only and supported region only. Exam pattern. Diagnose a dense captions request/result mismatch for one supported image analysis 4.0 image. Question 14. A team needs a low-latency voice agent that combines speech recognition, generative AI, text-to-speech, and external tool actions through one managed agent interface. The backend can exchange WebSocket events, and the team will verify the chosen model and supported region. Which implementation should the team select? A. Use standalone text-to-speech and expect it to perform speech recognition and generative orchestration. B. Use only fast transcription for pre-recorded files and treat its transcript as the complete agent response. C. Use voice live and enable function calling for the required external actions. D. Use only asynchronous batch transcription and expect it to synthesize spoken replies. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Use voice live and enable function calling for the required external actions. Why this works. Voice Live is the managed low-latency interface that combines speech recognition, generative AI, and text-to-speech. It supports function calling for external actions, and server-to-server integration uses WebSocket events. Model capability, latency, cost, and supported region still require separate verification. Exam pattern. Select a managed architecture for a real-time bidirectional voice agent with external actions. Question 15. A team is starting a new code-first orchestration that must run agents in a predefined sequence, apply if/else business rules, and pause for human approval. The Foundry Visual Workflow Designer is Preview, and its workflows retire on December 1st, 2026. Which approach should the team use? A. Use a larger single model and encode the approval requirement only as a natural language prompt. B. Use Microsoft Agent Framework for the new deterministic code-first workflow. C. Build a new workflow in the retiring Foundry Visual Designer and depend on in-portal execution after retirement. D. Use Model Router because its per-request model choice also enforces deterministic rules and approvals. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. Use Microsoft Agent Framework for the new deterministic code-first workflow. Why this works. Deterministic sequencing, branching, variables, and human approvals belong to a workflow or orchestration layer, not model router. Because the Visual Foundry Workflow Designer is Preview and workflows retire on December 1st, 2026, the archive source directs new workflows to Microsoft Agent Framework. Exam pattern. Choose a supported successor for a new deterministic code-first multi-agent workflow with approval gates. Question 16. A Microsoft Foundry application has variable, bursty traffic and requires pay-per-token billing. Inference data may be processed anywhere within the EU data zone, but must not be processed outside that zone. The current deployment configuration is shown. Which correction best satisfies the requirements? Visible artifact. The deployment type is global standard in a supported European Union region. The requirements specify an inference processing boundary within the European Union data zone, a variable bursty workload, and pay-per-token billing. A. Use data zone standard in a supported EU region, then verify model availability and quota for that type and region. B. Keep global standard in the EU resource region, because the resource region constrains all inference processing to that region. C. Use developer because it provides EU data residency guarantees and an SLA for variable production traffic. D. Use global provisioned because reserved capacity keeps processing in the deployment region and matches bursty billing. Lock in your answer. Correct response, A. Use data zone standard in a supported EU region, then verify model availability and quota for that type and region. Why this works. Global types may process inference in any Azure region, even when the resource is in an EU region. Data Zone Standard keeps processing within the named data zone and uses pay-per-token billing suitable for variable traffic. Model support, regional availability, quota, and rate limits must still be checked before rollout. Exam pattern. Diagnose a deployment type mismatch across inference processing boundary, traffic pattern, and billing model. Question 17. An Azure OpenAI GPT image edit must modify only the area marked in mask.png. The mask has the same dimensions as input.png. The request currently sends the reference image but no mask. What should the developer add? Visible artifact. The edit body contains the prompt, replace the damaged label with a clean label, a count of 1, a size of 1024 by 1024, and medium quality. The files payload contains an image named input.png, opened in binary read mode, with the image PNG media type. The code sends a hypertext transfer protocol post request to the edit endpoint with an application programming interface key header whose value comes from the subscription key, the edit body as data, and the files payload as multi-part files. The response is stored as edit response. A. Add mask.png as the optional multi-part mask file while retaining the reference image. B. Remove the reference image and send only the prompt because a mask replaces the image input. C. Add a mask URL string to edit body and remove the multi-part image file. D. Switch to a preview MAI image model and assume it uses the same GPT image mask contract. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Add mask.png as the optional multi-part mask file while retaining the reference image. Why this works. The documented GPT image edit request sends the reference image as multi-part input. An optional multi-part mask identifies the edit region, and the supplied mask must be the same size as the input image. Exam pattern. Identify the missing request part for a region-limited GPT image in Painting Edit. Question 18. An administrator checks the Foundry portal quota page for a model. The scope column shows data zone. How should the administrator plan quota management for this model? A. Treat the model quota as isolated to the individual Foundry resource regardless of subscription. B. Treat the model quota as a separate per-region pool for each named Azure region. C. Treat the model quota as subscription-level quota management. D. Treat the model quota as a Microsoft Entra tenant-wide pool independent of subscription. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Treat the model quota as subscription-level quota management. Why this works. On the Foundry quota page, a scope value of global or data zone indicates subscription-level quota management. A named region indicates per-region management for that subscription and model. Exam pattern. Interpret the quota management scope shown for a specific model. Question 19. A team targets the Azure Content Understanding 2025-1101 GA API. It must divide each video into temporal sections for one content category by using visual cues, shot changes, and scene transitions, and then return classified segment metadata. What should the team configure? A. Use a retired preview API because segmentation is unavailable in the 2025-1101 GA path. B. Enable video segmentation with enable segment and specify one content category. C. Rely on 1 frame per second sampling to guarantee capture of every brief event. D. Configure spatial object bounding boxes and treat each rectangle as a temporal segment. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. Enable video segmentation with enable segment and specify one content category. Why this works. For video analyzers, enable segment uses one content category together with visual cues, shot changes, scene transitions, and temporal boundaries to produce classified segment metadata. The retired preview API versions are not the production target. The held evidence directs code to 2025-1101 GA. Exam pattern. Select the analyzer configuration for category-guided temporal video segmentation on the current GA API. Question 20. A Foundry agent already reports token usage and latency metrics. Engineers now need to debug the execution path across LLM calls, tool invocations, agent decisions, and inter-service dependencies. Which observability capability should they implement? A. Token and latency charts only, because monitoring and tracing are interchangeable. B. Distributed tracing with OpenTelemetry and application insights. C. A larger continuous evaluation sample rate without trace instrumentation. D. A single safety evaluator score in place of execution flow telemetry. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Distributed tracing with OpenTelemetry and application insights. Why this works. Distributed tracing captures execution flow across LLM calls, tool invocations, agent decisions, and inter-service dependencies. Monitoring, evaluation, and tracing work together, but are distinct capabilities. Exam pattern. Choose the observability mechanism for debugging causal execution flow rather than aggregate metrics or evaluator scores. Question 21. A team has a Foundry project, a compatible model deployment, required RBAC, and an authenticated reusable project connection. A calling agent must delegate one task to a remote A2A compatible endpoint, receive the answer, and retain control of later user input. Which mechanism should the team use? A. Attach the preview A2A tool to the calling Foundry agent and use the configured A2A project connection. B. Call the remote endpoint without a project connection because A2A protocol compatibility supplies authentication. C. Use classic connected agents or agent.as tool in Foundry New because they are equivalent to current A2A. D. Create a formal multi-step workflow solely to make the lightweight endpoint call return control. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Attach the preview A2A tool to the calling Foundry agent and use the configured A2A project connection. Why this works. The preview A2A tool supports outbound delegation from a Foundry agent to a remote A2A compatible endpoint. The called agent returns an answer, while the calling agent retains control and handles subsequent user input. The configured project connection and authentication prerequisites still apply. Exam pattern. Select lightweight multi-agent endpoint delegation while preserving caller control. Question 22. An Azure OpenAI extraction workflow must return data that follows a supplied JSON schema. The application also uses strict function calling and can process one tool call at a time. Which configuration meets the requirement? A. Use Azure Language Pre-configured NER because it enforces any supplied JSON schema. B. Use Azure Language Summarization and customize its underlying model to emit the schema. C. Use JSON mode without a schema and leave parallel function calls enabled. D. Use structured outputs with the supplied JSON schema and set parallel tool calls to false. Lock in your answer. Correct response. D. Use structured outputs with the supplied JSON schema and set parallel tool calls to false. Why this works. Azure OpenAI structured outputs make the model follow a supplied JSON schema and support strict function calling. Structured outputs are not supported with parallel function calls, so parallel tool calls must be false. Exam pattern. Configure schema strict extraction when strict function calling is used serially. Question 23. A team is starting a long-lived production workflow with hosted agents. Each request must pass through a triage agent, then a specialist agent, and then a summarizer in a defined order. Which design should the team choose? A. Use the resource-level OpenAI endpoint because it exposes Foundry-specific agents and exclusive platform tools. B. Use a group chat pattern so agents dynamically transfer control based on context. C. Implement a sequential workflow in Microsoft Agent Framework from code. D. Build the hosted agent flow in the Foundry Visual Workflow Designer as the durable production default. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Implement a sequential workflow in Microsoft Agent Framework from code. Why this works. A sequential workflow passes output through agents in a defined order. Microsoft Agent Framework is the recommended code orchestration layer for hosted agents and new multi-agent workflows. The Foundry Visual Workflow Designer is public preview, is not recommended for production workloads, and is scheduled to retire on December 1st, 2026. Exam pattern. Choose a production-capable orchestration surface and pattern for hosted agents with fixed order handoff. Case study. Fabricam is preparing a Microsoft Foundry customer support agent. The agent uses Azure AI search retrieval for policy documents and a custom order status API. For a pilot document ingestion path, the team is evaluating the preview Logic Apps indexing integration. The team must configure each tool explicitly and establish post-production practices for quality, safety, drift detection, red teaming, and alerting. Keep this shared context in mind for the next question. Question 24. Using the case scenario, an architect reviews the following design manifest. It is a review artifact, not deployable Foundry syntax. Which two conclusions should the architect record? Visible artifact. The agent tools include policy lookup and order status. Policy lookup uses the Azure Artificial Intelligence search kind, the project connection policy search connection, and the index policy index. Order status uses the Open Application Programming Interface kind and managed identity authentication. Select two answers. A. The Open API entry represents a custom API integration, and managed identity is one documented Open API authentication option. B. The manifest proves both tools are generally available for every model and Azure region. C. Creating the search index and naming it in the manifest completes the knowledge integration without a project connection or retrieval testing. D. The search entry supplies a project connection and index, but the plan must still test retrieval quality, response accuracy, and citations. E. Both entries use one universal service authentication and execution contract because they appear in the same tool manifest. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. The Open API entry represents a custom API integration, and managed identity is one documented Open API authentication option. D. The search entry supplies a project connection and index, but the plan must still test retrieval quality, response accuracy, and citations. Why this works. Foundry distinguishes built-in tools from custom integrations. Agent retrieval uses search as a tool connected through the project and still requires retrieval, response, and citation testing. Open API is a custom integration option, and managed identity is one documented Open API authentication method. Authentication, lifecycle, model support, and regional availability remain tool-specific. Exam pattern. Interpret a mixed search and API tool design and identify the remaining integration obligations. Question 25. A team is configuring one Microsoft Foundry evaluation run. Some selected evaluators support only turn-level evaluation, while others support only conversation-level evaluation. The team needs results from all of them. What should the team do? A. Set evaluation level to conversation and keep every evaluator in the run. B. Separate the evaluators into compatible runs and set each run to a level supported by all evaluators in that run. C. Set evaluation level to turn and keep every evaluator in the run. D. Omit evaluation level so Foundry automatically combines both levels in one run. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Separate the evaluators into compatible runs and set each run to a level supported by all evaluators in that run. Why this works? Every evaluator in a run must support that run as selected evaluation level. Omitting the setting defaults to turn it does not make incompatible turn and conversation level evaluators compatible. Separate runs preserve the supported level requirement. Exam pattern. Diagnose an evaluator compatibility failure and partition evaluation runs by supported evaluation level. You are halfway through the practice exam. Reset your attention. Keep architecture choices separate from runtime controls, and verify the exact mechanism each requirement needs. Question 26. A developer must retrieve tracked real-world objects and their time ranges from an uploaded and indexed video by using Azure AI Video Indexer. Which two implementation details meet the requirement? Select two answers. A. Read component definitions because object detection defines components for every tracked object. B. Expect reliable tracking of unlimited animated or CGI objects in every frame. C. Download the portal insights.json or call getVideoIndex with include summarized insights equals false. D. Use the same object insight path directly against a live video stream. E. Read detected objects entries and their repeated temporal instances, including start and end times. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. Download the portal insights.json or call getVideoIndex with include summarized insights equals false. E. Read detected objects entries and their repeated temporal instances, including start and end times. Why this works? For uploaded and indexed files, object insights are available in portal.json or through getVideoIndex with include summarized insights equals false. The detected objects collection contains tracked instances and timing. The held object insight path does not apply to live streams and defines no components. Exam pattern. Choose the supported retrieval path and result structure for temporal object tracks in an uploaded video. Question 27. A Python application for a Foundry new project has created AI Project Client with the project endpoint and default Azure credential. It must now issue model calls through the OpenAI compatible client derived from that project. Which line should replace missing step? Visible artifact. Python code imports default Azure credential from Azure Identity and the Azure Artificial Intelligence Project client from Azure Artificial Intelligence Projects. A constant named project endpoint stores the Azure Artificial Intelligence Project endpoint. The project client is created with that endpoint and a default Azure credential and is stored in a variable named project. The code ends immediately before the next step. A. OpenAI equals default Azure credential project endpoint. B. OpenAI equals AI project client endpoint equals project endpoint. C. OpenAI equals project.getOpenAI client. D. OpenAI equals project.getConnection project endpoint. Lock in your answer. Correct response, C. OpenAI equals project.getOpenAI client. Why this works? The Foundry SDK project client exposes getOpenAI client, which derives an OpenAI compatible client from the project scoped client. The endpoint and default Azure credential belong on AI project client construction. Exam pattern. Complete the Foundry SDK client construction chain after project scoped authentication. Question 28. An Azure AI Search grounding index already has vector fields and a semantic configuration. The team must add query-only integrated vectorization, then submit one request that combines full-text search, vector search, and semantic ranking. Arrange the remaining implementation steps. Visible artifact. JavaScript object notation artifact. The index state uses a semantic configuration named grounding semantic. No vectorizer, no vector profile, and no vector field profile are configured. The query state searches for warranty exclusions. It contains no vector queries and has no query type set. Move all 4 steps into the correct order. A. Submit a request with search, a text-bearing vector, queries entry, query type equals semantic, and the semantic configuration. B. Assign the vectorizer to a vector profile. C. Assign the vector profile to the vector field. D. Add a matching query-time vectorizer to the index. Lock in your answer. Correct response. Step 1. Add a matching query-time vectorizer to the index. Step 2. Assign the vectorizer to a vector profile. Step 3. Assign the vector profile to the vector field. Step 4. Submit a request with search, a text-bearing vector queries entry, query type equals semantic, and the semantic configuration. Why this works. Query-only integrated vectorization first adds a vectorizer, assigns it to a vector profile, and assigns that profile to the vector field. The request can then provide the full text query in search, text to vectorize in vector queries, and query type equals semantic with a semantic configuration for optional re-ranking. Exam pattern. Order index and query configuration for query-only vectorization inside a hybrid request with semantic re-ranking. Question 29. An application must extract domain events into a typed schema. Valid JSON is insufficient. Every response must adhere to the supplied JSON schema. The deployment is GPT-4o, version 2024-08-06, and the application uses the latest GA Azure OpenAI API. Which implementation should the developer choose? A. Use structured outputs through Foundry agent service and omit the task-specific schema. B. Use structured outputs through OpenAI version 1 with a task-specific instruction and the JSON schema. C. Use JSON mode through OpenAI version 1 and rely on valid JSON as proof of schema adherence. D. Use Translator 2026-06-06 adaptive references as the schema validator for extracted events. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Use structured outputs through OpenAI version 1 with a task-specific instruction and the JSON schema. Why this works. Structured outputs constrain the response to a supplied JSON schema, whereas JSON mode guarantees valid JSON without strict schema adherence. The latest GA OpenAI version 1 supports structured outputs, and GPT-4o version 2024-08-06 is directly listed as supported in the held evidence. Exam pattern. Select strict schema-constrained extraction instead of adjacent JSON, agent or translation customization mechanisms. Question 30. A Foundry new application can call models and embeddings, but its agents, evaluations, and Foundry exclusive tools are unavailable. The configuration artifact shows the endpoint selected by the application. Which diagnosis and change are correct? Visible artifact. JavaScript object notation artifact. It identifies the OpenAI software development kit. The endpoint scope is resource-level Azure OpenAI. The required capabilities are agents, evaluations, and Foundry exclusive tools. A. Keep the resource-level endpoint. Adding a project connection automatically exposes all Foundry features. B. Use the Foundry project endpoint through the Foundry SDK, because the resource-level endpoint omits those project-specific capabilities. C. Keep the resource-level endpoint. Switch to Azure AI Projects 1.x because classic and new clients are compatible. D. Replace the endpoint with a connected resource name. Endpoint scope no longer matters after authentication. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Use the Foundry project endpoint through the Foundry SDK because the resource level endpoint omits those project-specific capabilities. Why this works. The resource level OpenAI endpoint provides the OpenAI API surface, including embeddings, but not Foundry-specific agents, evaluations, or exclusive platform tools. Those capabilities require the Responses API through the project-scoped endpoint with the Foundry SDK. Exam pattern. Diagnose capability loss caused by selecting the resource-level OpenAI endpoint instead of the Foundry project endpoint. Question 31. A moderation service must classify harmful images, optionally evaluate an image together with its caption, and support an organization-specific disallowed image category. Which 3 implementation decisions are supported by the held evidence? Select 3 answers. A. Treat 4 severity levels as an automatic rule that blocks every image with any non-zero severity. B. For the rapid custom category image path, enforce at most 1,000 text/image samples per incident and 4 megabytes per image. C. For image-only analysis, call image, analyze API version 2024-09-01 with base 64 content or a blob URL and request 4 severity levels as needed. D. Use custom category standard to train the organization-specific classifier directly on image samples. E. Reuse the image analyze request contract unchanged for multimodal because both surfaces have identical inputs. F. For image plus caption context, use the separate multimodal API and first verify a supported Azure region. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. For the rapid custom category image path, enforce at most 1,000 text/image samples per incident and 4 megabytes per image. C. For image-only analysis, call image, analyze API version 2024-09-01 with base 64 content or a blob URL and request 4 severity levels as needed. F. For image plus caption context, use the separate multimodal API and first verify a supported Azure region. Why this works. The GA image analyze 2024-09-01 path accepts base 64 image content or a blob URL and can return 4 severity levels. Image plus text analysis uses the distinct multimodal preview surface and is region limited. Custom category standard is text only in the held evidence. The rapid preview path accepts image samples under its incident and size limits. Severity classification does not itself define an application blocking policy. Exam pattern. Choose product surface specific implementations for image only, image plus text, and organization-specific visual moderation. Question 32. A team reviews the following safeguard plan for a Foundry agent service workflow. The agent can propose account closure through a tool. Match each identified gap to the corrective mechanism. Visible artifact. Workflow plan artifact. The selected surface is the Foundry Visual Workflow Designer. Account closure approval is not configured. The agent guardrail scans user input and final output only. Requirements. 1. The irreversible account closure action can proceed without a person confirming it. 2. The proposed tool name and arguments are not scanned for the configured risk. 3. The tool result can reach the model without being scanned for the configured risk. 4. New long-term development depends on the visual designer beyond its supported lifecycle. Available targets. A. Plan new workflow development on agent framework instead of the retiring visual designer. B. Add a human-in-the-loop approval checkpoint for account closure. C. Add the preview tool call intervention point to the agent guardrail. D. Add the preview tool response intervention point to the agent guardrail. Lock in your answer. Correct response. 1. The irreversible account closure action can proceed without a person confirming it. Matches add a human-in-the-loop approval checkpoint for account closure. 2. The proposed tool name and arguments are not scanned for the configured risk. Matches add the preview tool call intervention point to the agent guardrail. 3. The tool result can reach the model without being scanned for the configured risk. Matches add the preview tool response intervention point to the agent guardrail. 4. New long-term development depends on the visual designer beyond its supported lifecycle. Matches plan new workflow development on agent framework instead of the retiring visual designer. Why this works. Approval flow and guardrail intervention points are separate safeguards. User input and final output scanning do not prove that tool calls or tool responses are scanned. Agent guardrails and their tool intervention points are preview. The Foundry Visual Workflow Designer is preview, retires December 1, 2026, and directs new workflow development to agent framework. Exam pattern. Place approval and agent guardrail controls at the exact workflow and tool intervention points while respecting the visual designer retirement. Question 33. An Azure AI search indexer reports success, but users say some source documents are missing and the RAG answers do not consistently address their questions. Which two actions directly investigate the two reported problems? Select exactly two answers. A. Review indexer execution details for failed document keys, errors, and warnings. B. Use average search latency as the semantic relevance score. C. Treat the success status as proof that every document was ingested. D. Use the activity log to obtain the full details of each search call made with an admin key. E. Run the relevance evaluator to measure each response with respect to its query. Lock in your answer. Correct response. A. Review indexer execution details for failed document keys, errors, and warnings. E. Run the relevance evaluator to measure each response with respect to its query. Why this works. Indexer success can coexist with tolerated document failures, and warnings can identify unexpected ingestion outcomes. Execution details expose document-level evidence. Response relevance measures fit to the query. Latency is an operational health signal rather than a semantic relevance score. Exam pattern. Use document-level indexer evidence for ingestion gaps and a semantic evaluator for response relevance. Question 34. A team needs a new, generally available Azure OpenAI image solution in eStuce 2. The application must generate from text, accept a reference image for edits, and can consume base64 image output. Which two implementation decisions satisfy the requirements? Select exactly two answers. A. Create a new DALL-E 3 deployment because it remains the current GA replacement for GPT image. B. Deploy the exact GPT image 2 model in the supported Azure OpenAI resource and region. C. Treat a visible quota row as proof that any listed image model is deployable in every Azure region. D. Use a myimage2.5 version while describing the implementation as generally available. E. Use the GPT image generation path for prompts and the separate edits path for a reference image and optional same size mask. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Deploy the exact GPT image 2 model in the supported Azure OpenAI resource and region. E. Use the GPT image generation path for prompts and the separate edits path for a reference image and optional same size mask. Why this works. GPT image 2 is generally available in the held model table, supports text plus image inputs, and returns base64 image output. The edits path accepts an image and an optional same size mask. Availability remains model, version, and region specific. Legacy DAL-E3 is retired and non-functional, while the named MAI Image 2.5 versions are preview. Exam pattern. Select the exact GA image model and request path for text generation plus reference media editing. Question 35. A Foundry agent service application conducts a 3-turn eligibility check. The client already retains each response identifier and passes context only to the immediately following turn. The history does not need to be reused across sessions. Which conversation tracking approach best fits this design? A. Represent prior messages as required properties in a tool.json schema. B. Store the turn history in the persisted agent definition as a new agent version. C. Pass the previous response output into the next turn without creating a durable conversation. D. Create a durable conversation because every multi-turn interaction requires one. Lock in your answer. Correct response. C. Pass the previous response output into the next turn without creating a durable conversation. Why this works. Conversation creation is optional. Previous response context can carry an immediately preceding interaction into the next turn. A durable conversation is useful when reusable history is required, but it is separate from the versioned agent definition and from tool schemas. Exam pattern. Choose previous response context instead of durable conversation storage for a bounded, immediately chained interaction. Question 36. A Foundry agent connects to a remote MCP server that exposes search order, cancel order, and export customers. The agent must access only search order and cancel order. A person must approve cancel order calls, but search order calls must not require approval. Which configuration meets the requirements? A. Allow list only search order. Set approval to never for every tool on the server. B. Expose all server tools and rely on a content guardrail to authorize cancel order. C. Omit allowed tools. Set approval to always for cancel order and never for search order. D. Allow list search order and cancel order. Set named tool approval to always for cancel order and never for search order. Lock in your answer. Correct response. D. Allow list search order and cancel order. Set named tool approval to always for cancel order and never for search order. Why this works. Allowed tools limits which remote MCP tools the agent can access. Omitting it includes every tool exposed by the server. Require approval. Can use named tool, always, and never policies, so search can proceed while cancellation pauses for approval. Content guardrails are not tool allow lists or downstream authorization. Exam pattern. Combine MCP tool exposure controls with a per-tool human approval policy. Question 37. A team is defining an evaluation plan for a RAG assistant. Match each investigation goal to the Foundry evaluator or observability capability that directly addresses it. Requirements. 1. Measure whether retrieved information is effective for the query. 2. Measure whether the answer is supported by the retrieved context. 3. Measure natural language quality and readability. 4. Inspect execution flow across model calls, tools, decisions, and dependencies. Available targets. A. Retrieval evaluator. B. Distributed tracing. C. Fluency evaluator. D. Groundedness evaluator. E. Relevance evaluator. Lock in your answer. Correct response. 1. Measure whether retrieved information is effective for the query. Matches Retrieval evaluator. 2. Measure whether the answer is supported by the retrieved context. Matches Groundedness evaluator. 3. Measure natural language quality and readability. Matches Fluency evaluator. 4. Inspect execution flow across model calls, tools, decisions, and dependencies. Matches Distributed tracing. Why this works. Retrieval, groundedness, fluency, and tracing answer different questions. Retrieval measures search effectiveness. Groundedness checks support in retrieved context. Fluency measures language quality. And tracing records execution flow. Relevance instead measures the response with respect to the query. Exam pattern. Map evaluation goals to distinct quality dimensions and keep tracing separate from scoring. Question 38. A current Microsoft Foundry model deployment has reached succeeded status. The application configuration below still uses the catalog model name in the inference request. Which correction routes the request to the created deployment? Visible artifact. JavaScript object notation artifact. The selected model value and the inference request model value are both GPT model. The deployment name is claims prod. The deployment status is succeeded. A. Rename the deployment to GPT-model and keep the request unchanged. B. Set inference request.model to claims-prod. C. Set inference request.model to the project endpoint URL. D. Leave the request unchanged because model always expects the catalog model name. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Set inference request.model to claims-prod. Why this works. For an explicit current Foundry model deployment, the deployment name is used in the model parameter to route inference requests. The selected catalog model and the deployment name do not have to be identical, and succeeded status is required before use. Exam pattern. Correct inference routing after initial model deployment by using the deployment name in the model parameter. Question 39. A warehouse assistant already generates troubleshooting guidance. After a technician confirms a repair, it must create a work order in the maintenance API and report the actual number returned by that system. Which design adds the required capability? A. Send the request to model router, so choosing an underlying model also performs the maintenance system right. B. Replace the model with a larger model and instruct it to include a plausible work order number. C. Configure an agent tool for the maintenance API, invoke it after confirmation, and return the API result to the conversation. D. Deploy a small language model and place the maintenance API schema in the prompt without an executable capability. Lock in your answer. Correct response. C. Configure an agent tool for the maintenance API, invoke it after confirmation, and return the API result to the conversation. Why this works. A model generates responses or decides that an action is needed. An executable tool calls the external API. Changing or routing models does not perform the right or return the authoritative work order number. Exam pattern. Separate model generation from executable external action. Question 40. An Azure AI Search blob indexer has allow skill set to read file data enabled. A skill must analyze each source document and emit markdown section objects for downstream chunking. Which skill definition fragment has a coherent document layout contract? A. O data type Microsoft.skills.util.document intelligence layout skill, context equals /document, output mode equals 1 to many, output format equals markdown, input file data from /document/file data, output markdown document. B. O data type Microsoft.skills.util.document intelligence layout skill, context equals /document, output mode equals 1 to 1, output format equals markdown, input file data from /document/file data, output markdown document. C. O data type Microsoft.skills.util.document intelligence layout skill, context equals /document, output mode equals 1 to many, output format equals text, input file data from /document/file data, output markdown document. D. O data type Microsoft.skills.util.document intelligence layout skill, context equals /document, output mode equals 1 to many, output format equals markdown, input file data from /document/file data, output text sections. Lock in your answer. Correct response: A. O data type Microsoft.skills.util.document intelligence layout skill. Context equals /document. Output mode equals 1 to many. Output format equals markdown. Input file data from /document/file data. Output markdown document. Why this works. The document layout skill uses Microsoft.skills.util.document intelligence layout skill. Its documented input is file data. Output mode supports 1 to many, and markdown document is the output that applies when output format is markdown. Each distractor keeps the correct skill type, but breaks a different parameter or output contract. Exam pattern. Identify the coherent built-in document layout schema from same type, same layer alternatives. Question 41. An architect must separate live interpretation, a no-code trial, a programmatic recorded audio workflow, and a downstream metadata dependency. Match each case to the supported design decision, while preserving the held lifecycle, portal, API version, and response boundaries. Requirements. 1. A call center interpreter must translate microphone audio into translated speech or text while the caller is still speaking. 2. Before developers write code, a product owner wants to upload a recorded call and trial the accepted preview capability interactively in a portal. 3. A backend service must submit a recorded call and receive text in a specified target language through the documented programmatic contract. 4. A compliance pipeline for translated recordings depends on per-word timing, multiple speaker diarization, and non-zero confidence values. Available targets. A. Choose the standalone Azure Speech Translation implementation. B. Reject the unsupported output contract and redesign the downstream dependency. C. Choose the Preview LLM Speech API implementation with the held 2025-1015 translation configuration. D. Choose the Speech Batch Transcription API because it returns translated target language text natively. E. Choose the Preview LLM Speech Playground implementation in the new Microsoft Foundry portal. Lock in your answer. Correct response. 1. Call center interpreter must translate microphone audio into translated speech or text while the caller is still speaking. Matches. Choose the standalone Azure Speech Translation implementation. 2. Before developers write code, a product owner wants to upload a recorded call and trial the accepted preview capability interactively in a portal. Matches. Choose the Preview LLM Speech Playground implementation in the new Microsoft Foundry portal. 3. A backend service must submit a recorded call and receive text in a specified target language through the documented programmatic contract. Matches. Choose the Preview LLM Speech API implementation with the held 2025-1015 translation configuration. 4. A compliance pipeline for translated recordings depends on per-word timing, multiple speaker diarization, and non-zero confidence values. Matches. Reject the unsupported output contract and redesign the downstream dependency. Why this works. Standalone Azure Speech supports real-time speech translation. LLM Speech is a separate preview path for pre-recorded audio and is available in the new Foundry portal, not the classic portal. Its held translation request uses the 2025-1015 transcriptions endpoint contract, and translated output omits word timing and diarization, while confidence is unavailable and always 0. Exam pattern. Infer the correct live or recorded audio translation design, delivery surface, programmatic contract, and unsupported response remediation from the held speech boundaries. Question 42. A team uses a document-based Azure Content Understanding Analyzer. The output includes deeper chart data extraction and diagram component identification. But the accessibility pipeline also requires natural language descriptions of figures, diagrams, images, and illustrations. Which configuration change directly adds the required output without confusing the two figure features? Visible artifact. JavaScript object notation artifact. The analyzer type is document. Figure analysis is enabled. Figure description is disabled. A. Keep enable figure description false because enable figure analysis already produces the same accessibility description. B. Set enable figure description to true and keep the analyzer type as document. C. Change the analyzer type to image because figure descriptions are not documented for document analyzers. D. Replace enable figure description with the vision detail parameter set to high to request longer output. Lock in your answer. Correct response, B. Set enable figure description to true and keep the analyzer type as document. Why this works. For document-based content understanding analyzers, enable figure description generates natural language descriptions for accessibility uses. Enable figure analysis is a separate document analyzer option for deeper chart data extraction and diagram component identification. It is not a substitute for figure descriptions. Exam pattern. Correct a document analyzer so it produces accessibility-oriented figure descriptions while retaining separate structural figure analysis. Question 43. A GitHub Actions workflow deploys a Microsoft Foundry hosted agent with Azure Developer CLI. The repository was initialized with AZD. The Foundry project and hosted agent were provisioned previously. Required repository variables are present, and the workflow identity already has mode-appropriate roles. The deployment fragment is missing one prerequisite step before AZD configures and deploys the environment. What should be added? Visible artifact. The workflow contains 4 ordered steps. The first configures the Azure Developer CLI environment by setting the project endpoint environment value from the workflow variable with the same name. The second deploys the hosted agent without prompting. The third displays the hosted agent status. The fourth invokes the hosted agent with a smoke test message taken from the workflow variable named agent test prompt A. Store a long-lived Azure client secret and use it instead of the configured OIDC federation. B. Add Azure sign-in by using the configured GitHub OpenID Connect federation before the AZD steps. C. Remove the smoke test invocation because deployment status alone validates the agent response path. D. Run AZD provision for the first time inside this deployment fragment, even though the project and agent already exist. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Add Azure sign-in by using the configured GitHub OpenID Connect federation before the AZD steps. Why this works. The documented GitHub Actions flow uses OIDC to sign into Azure before configuring the AZD environment, deploying the hosted agent, showing status, and sending a smoke test message. The stated prerequisites already cover prior provisioning, repository variables, and mode-appropriate roles. Exam pattern. Diagnose the missing authentication prerequisite in a GitHub Actions hosted agent deployment sequence. Question 44. An Azure AI search indexer pulls PDFs with embedded images from a supported cloud data source. The indexer is configured with a skill set that performs OCR and with source field mappings to a destination search index. Order the runtime stages that ingest, map, enrich, and index the content. Arrange all 5 steps in the correct order. A. Have the indexer pull source documents from the configured cloud data source. B. Crack each document to open the file and extract its text, embedded images, and metadata. C. Execute the skill set so OCR or other image analysis enriches the cracked content. D. Apply the configured source-to-destination field mappings to the cracked source fields before transformations. E. Populate the destination search index with the resulting textual and enriched fields. Lock in your answer. Correct response. Step 1. Have the indexer pull source documents from the configured cloud data source. Step 2. Crack each document to open the file and extract its text, embedded images, and metadata. Step 3. Apply the configured source-to-destination field mappings to the cracked source fields before transformations. Step 4. Execute the skill set so OCR or other image analysis enriches the cracked content. Step 5. Populate the destination search index with the resulting textual and enriched fields. Why this works. The indexer first pulls files from its configured source and cracks each document to extract text, images, and metadata. Source field mapping occurs after document cracking but before transformations. The indexer then executes the skill set so OCR or other image analysis enriches the cracked content, and the resulting textual and enriched fields are finally populated into the destination search index. Exam pattern. Order the Azure AI Search Indexer runtime flow while keeping source field mapping before skill set transformations and destination index population after enrichment. Question 45. A team is choosing Azure speech mechanisms for 4 independent agent requirements. Match each scenario to the supported decision while preserving the held recognition, synthesis, access, and deployment boundaries. Requirements. 1. Product names and account codes change weekly, so recognition must be biased immediately without collecting a training dataset or creating a new model. 2. Recognition is inaccurate for specialized vocabulary and room acoustics. The team can supply domain text plus audio with reference transcriptions. 3. Spoken agent replies must use a proprietary brand persona, and the organization can complete an eligibility review and intake process. 4. An accepted adapted model will process recorded calls only, and operations must avoid keeping an online deployment running solely for that workload. Available targets. A. Configure a phrase list. B. Request access to and use custom voice. C. Use a custom speech model through batch transcription without deploying a hosted custom endpoint. D. Train and evaluate a custom speech model. Lock in your answer. Correct response. 1. Product names and account codes change weekly, so recognition must be biased immediately without collecting a training dataset or creating a new model. Matches configure a phrase list. 2. Recognition is inaccurate for specialized vocabulary and room acoustics. The team can supply domain text plus audio with reference transcriptions. Matches train and evaluate a custom speech model. 3. Spoken agent replies must use a proprietary brand persona, and the organization can complete an eligibility review and intake process. Matches request access to and use custom voice. 4. An accepted adapted model will process recorded calls only, and operations must avoid keeping an online deployment running solely for that workload. Matches use a custom speech model through batch transcription without deploying a hosted custom endpoint. Why this works. VoiceLive uses phrase lists for lightweight input customization and custom speech models for advanced recognition fine-tuning. Custom voice is a separate synthesized output path with limited access and an intake requirement. A hosted custom endpoint is required for custom speech use except for the documented batch transcription path. Exam pattern. Infer the appropriate lightweight biasing, trained recognition adaptation, govern synthesized persona, or offline-only deployment decision from operational constraints. Question 46. An application uses an Azure OpenAI reasoning model through the Responses API. The team must cap output tokens without adding a parameter that the reasoning model support table lists as unsupported. Which configuration change should the developer make? A. Set max tokens and temperature in the Responses API request. B. Set top P and frequency penalty in the Responses API request. C. Set max output tokens in the Responses API request. D. Set max completion tokens in the Responses API request. Lock in your answer. Correct response. C. Set max output tokens in the Responses API request. Why this works. For Azure OpenAI reasoning models, the output token parameter is API specific. Responses uses max output tokens, while chat completions uses max completion tokens. The held support table lists temperature, top P, frequency penalty, and max tokens as unsupported for reasoning models. Exam pattern. Select the correct output token control for a reasoning model on the Responses API. Question 47. A product support application must retrieve exact SKU matches and conceptually similar troubleshooting passages. The team requires a GA classic retrieval path and wants both retrieval modes executed in one request. Which two design choices meet the requirements? Select two answers. A. Use vector search alone because exact product identifiers do not benefit from keyword precision. B. Optionally add semantic ranking as an L2 re-ranker over the textual L1 results. C. Use classic hybrid search to run full text and vector queries in parallel and merge results with reciprocal rank fusion. D. Use preview agentic retrieval to decompose the request into multiple subqueries. E. Use semantic ranking as the standalone L1 retrieval method. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Optionally add semantic ranking as an L2 re-ranker over the textual L1 results. C. Use classic hybrid search to run full text and vector queries in parallel and merge results with reciprocal rank fusion. Why this works. Classic hybrid search is a GA single request pattern that runs full text and vector queries in parallel and merges them with reciprocal rank fusion. Semantic ranking can optionally re-rank eligible classic textual L1 results at L2. Preview agentic retrieval does not satisfy a GA-only requirement, and semantic ranking is not a standalone L1 retrieval method. Exam pattern. Design a GA retrieval pipeline combining exact and conceptual matching in one request. Question 48. A custom agent has been onboarded to the Foundry control plane and points to the same Application Insights instance as its Foundry project. The Monitor tab shows no agent telemetry. The deployment summary is shown. What should the engineer correct first? Visible artifact. JavaScript object notation artifact. It describes a custom agent. A control plane asset is present. Telemetry connects to the project Application Insights instance. The monitor view reports no metrics or charts. A trace sample contains custom spans with operation names and durations only. A. Start cluster-based error analysis before telemetry or evaluation results exist. B. Use a distributed trace as a substitute for evaluator scores and operational metrics. C. Emit the documented generative AI attributes and span structure required for the custom agent telemetry path. D. Enable a scheduled evaluation and treat it as the missing instrumentation layer. Lock in your answer. Correct response. C. Emit the documented generative AI attributes and span structure required for the custom agent telemetry path. Why this works. A custom agent must be onboarded, instrumented to the OpenTelemetry generative AI semantic conventions, and configured to send telemetry to the project's Application Insights instance before Foundry can show metrics and enable continuous evaluation. Monitoring, evaluation, tracing, and error analysis remain distinct capabilities. Exam pattern. Diagnose why an onboarded custom agent with the correct application insights destination produces no Foundry monitoring data. Question 49. A support agent must retain user-specific preferences learned across sessions. During a separate interaction, it must search documents uploaded by that user. Which two integrations should the architect choose in the archived Microsoft Foundry scope? Select two answers. A. Use a curated organizational knowledge base for both requirements, because all context types have the same persistent semantics. B. Use a Foundry IQ knowledge base as the user preference memory store. C. Use file search as the durable store for preferences learned over time. D. Use the file search tool for user-provided documents searched during the interaction. E. Use Foundry agent service memory for the learned cross-session user context, recognizing that memory is preview in the archive snapshot. Lock in your answer. Correct response. D. Use the file search tool for user-provided documents searched during the interaction. E. Use Foundry agent service memory for the learned cross-session user context, recognizing that memory is preview in the archived snapshot. Why this works. Foundry agent service memory is the documented choice for learned user-specific or agent context that persists across interactions. Memory and the Memory Store API are preview in the archived snapshot. File search is the documented choice for searching user-provided documents during an interaction. Neither capability should be replaced by a curated organizational knowledge base. Exam pattern. Select distinct context integrations for durable learned preferences and interaction-scoped user documents. Question 50. An engineer wants a Foundry guardrail to inspect proposed tool calls and returned tool content. The current configuration targets only a model deployment. What is the configuration defect? Visible artifact. Workflow configuration artifact. It defines a guardrail named Tool Safety. The target type is Model. The intervention points are Tool Call and Tool Response. A. The defect is the absence of a severity threshold. Adding 1 makes agent-only controls execute on the model. B. Tool Call and Tool Response intervention points are agent-only preview controls. Target a Foundry agent service agent for those controls to run. C. A model target automatically executes every agent-specific tool control, so no target change is needed. D. The defect is that tool call and tool response controls require an audio model target. Lock in your answer. Correct response. B. Tool call and tool response intervention points are agent-only preview controls. Target a Foundry agent service agent for those controls to run. Why this works. Tool call and tool response are agent-only intervention points and are preview in the archive source. Agent-specific controls are not run on models that use the same guardrail. To use these intervention points, the guardrail must apply to the supported Foundry agent service agent scope while preserving the preview qualifier. Exam pattern. Diagnose a guardrail whose intervention points are incompatible with its model-only target. You completed AI-103 Full Practice Exam 1. Review the mechanisms you missed, revisit the official documentation where needed, and use the next set to strengthen your exam-ready judgment. Thank you for practicing with WebLizard's Cert Lab. Continue with AI-103 Full Practice Exam 2 for integrated application and agent scenarios.